So mysterious were some classical figures that they aren't even included in many historical accounts. This is often due to the fact that they're cloaked in secrecy, leaving only questions in the place of answers. Number 10. There is much obscurity that surrounds both the life and eternal rest of Edgar Allan Poe, history's most well-known short story writer, poet, and critic. Poe became renowned through his cultivation of mystery and the macabre. From detective stories to tales of horror, his creations were steeped in mystique. Homogeneous to the saying, "You are what you eat," this historical figure became what he created, a mystery. Although Poe's life was marked by some secrecy, it was also characterized by vagueness due to his tendency to keep certain matters private. The writer has often been described as complex and troubled with tendencies of social alienation. Adding to the layer of intrigue was his later passing, which to this day has been left shrouded in mystery. It was the 7th of October, 1849, when the American-born author's life came to an untimely halt, but no one knows how. To date, there are at least 26 published stories about his demise that lend themselves to a myriad of legends, stories, and even films. Was it alcoholism, rabies, or a sinister homicidal plot? We may never know. But even in cessation, Poe continues to intrigue and cue new questions. One of those questions is, who was the Poe toaster? It was the 19th of January, 1949, after yet another midnight dreary, when he was first noticed, the strange, shadowy figure. Alone in the gothic gloom of the Westminster burial ground, he arrived, camouflaged by a black coat, his face masked by a scarf. Carrying a silver-tipped cane, this unknown figure walked up to the original gravesite of Edgar Allan Poe and poured a glass of cognac. After toasting to the 100-year deceased author, he placed a set of 3 long-stemmed roses by the headstone and vanished. But his disappearance was short-lived, and the cloaked figure reappeared the following year, and then the next. The tradition continued every year for the next 60 years, with the same routine taking place. Sometimes the mysterious individual would leave the unfinished bottle of cognac behind. Other times it was a note, which read, "Edgar, I haven't forgotten you." By the mid-1970s, intrigue was at its peak, and the search for answers expanded. Groups of mystery hunters hid in the church near Poe's grave, waiting, but somehow the Poe toaster evaded them. In 1993, the mystery only deepened when the unknown man left a note that read, "The torch will be passed." Many interpreted this as a sign that the tradition was being passed on to the next generation, and not long after that, the details of the practice changed. Cryptic notes became the norm. It seemed, though, that the new keeper didn't take the tradition as seriously as his predecessor, and by 2007, on the 200th anniversary of Poe's birth, the Poe toaster was no more. Number 9. Shrouded in just as much ambiguity was the British occultist, writer, and mountaineer, Aleister Crowley. Aside from the fact that he spelled magic with a K, Crowley's decadent lifestyle also made him particularly intriguing. Born to a Christian family in 1875, he would go on to spend the rest of his life renouncing the strict teachings of the religion. In fact, he was completely averse to the idea of Christianity, and by the 19th century, like many skeptics, he became interested in the occult, after which many unfortunate incidents would be attributed to him, resulting in the line between what he did and did not do becoming completely distorted. In 1898, Crowley joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he encountered rivalry with poet William Butler Yeats. As he became more ingrained in life as an occultist, he would draw on the name Great Beast 666. He also founded a religion, which he called Thelema, and appointed himself as the prophet. Afterward, he wrote a book called the Book of Law, claiming that it had been dictated to him by a non-physical being who called himself I Was. It would be this very book that would become the scripture of the newfound religion, which the German mystical group, Ordo Templi Orientis, ultimately accepted. Following his relinquishment of the accepted religion in the 1880s, Crowley found himself becoming demonized and rumors began to emanate. Cannibal, they named him, suggesting that he targeted children to devour to satiate his supposed satanic ways. In 1905, during a mountaineering expedition, having honed the skill, 4 of Crowley's fellow climbers were taken out in an avalanche. It was said that the occultist, who'd actually advised them not to take the fatal route, had ignored the cries of the survivors of the incident, but whether or not this is true remains in question. Following the First World War, the demonized individual would move to Cefalu, located in the Italian city of Sicily. Here, he would convert a home into the Abbey of Thelema, a sanctuary of sorts. It was at this place that a young follower of Crowley's would lose his life, and again it was he who was blamed. It was said that the young man had participated in sacrilegious rituals orchestrated by the occultist. The rumor, of course, led to his denunciation, and he was dubbed the wickedest man in the world. It also led to his expulsion from Italy. Crowley's passing in 1947 was surrounded by poverty as well as obscurity. But even in his dispatch from life, he couldn't escape the mystery that he was. Aside from being an occultist, poet, painter, prophet, addict, and allegedly a traitor, Crowley had one more piece of magic up his sleeve that would blow the crowd away and only add to the questions that linger around him. In one of his books, this alleged spy made references to intelligence work. He claimed to have played a great role in the Secret Service, supposedly on behalf of His Majesty. At first, it may have seemed like just another fantasy or rumor used to further demonize the man, but upon reviewing the forgotten World War I files, the confirmation was apparent. The stories that arose over the years, the ones that named him a traitor, evil, demonic, cannibal, and slaughterer of children, can now be challenged, as it's now alleged that his strange demeanor was merely a cover. It can also be confidently assumed that we have absolutely no idea who Aleister Crowley truly was, his history having been made up of demonized fantasies and discrimination. Number 8. During the 17th century, people with disabilities were viewed as nothing more than oddities or pets. This was especially true for the royalists, who, hungry for a good laugh, would go as far as kidnapping or even purchasing human beings. From his birth, this would be Geoffrey Hudson's fate, bound to be the entertainer for the Queen's court. The story of Geoffrey is nothing short of strange and begins right at the start of his birth. But to ordinary parents among average-sized siblings, Geoffrey was unusually small. From early on, his smallness, yet regular proportions were apparent. At the time, it was rumored that this oddity was caused by his mother choking while still pregnant with him. Although in the modern world this can now be attributed to a hormone deficiency caused by the pituitary gland. It isn't known as to how, but by 1626, Geoffrey was no longer living with his parents and siblings, and instead found himself being carted off to Buckingham, where he was presented to the Duchess as a natural rarity. The story only gets worse. After the Duchess had the young Geoffrey join her household, she decided as an amusing gift to present him to King Charles I and his French wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. But simply walking the dwarf man into the court was out of the question. Instead, he was placed within the center of a large pie, which was served to the Queen. As it was placed in front of her, Geoffrey arose from the crust standing just 18 inches tall and dressed in a suit of armor. Of course, Henrietta was delighted by the sight of the individual, and so the Duke and Duchess of Buckingham offered him as a gift to the court. From then on, he would serve as the court dwarf, the Queen's dwarf who would come to be known as Lord Minimus. Geoffrey would live a life of luxury, one that he couldn't have imagined otherwise. But also he was destined to be nothing more than an object of curiosity and a joke. As the years drifted by, he would find himself becoming increasingly threatened by the growing danger posed to the royal court. Years of disagreement between the Parliament and King Charles led to an armed conflict. The English Civil War would ravage the country for 7 years, ultimately culminating in the king's demise. Henrietta, also threatened by the conflict, decided to run whenever the war broke out, taking the court dwarf with her. Her plan was to persuade the Dutch to support her, but other than raising funds, she returned to England unsuccessful. The Queen was now a target for the enemy forces. In hopes of protecting his queen and luxurious lifestyle, Jeffrey decided to join the other men in protection duties and received much recognition for his bravery. He was even awarded the title of Captain of the Horse. A year later, Henrietta and her entourage established a base in Nevers and were joined by royal courtiers, including William and Charles Crofts, her brothers. It was here that Jeffrey would finally snap. Though he had displayed considerable courage, he soon found himself back in the unfortunate role of court jester, a joke. The resentment by now had built up, and in 1644, he challenged Charles to a duel. His young opponent unsurprisingly treated the whole thing as a joke and turned up to the contest with the medieval likeness of a water pistol. But Jeffrey was armed with something much more serious and fired it at his opponent. The result was fatal. Since dueling had already been outlawed decades earlier, the court dwarf was ultimately sentenced to execution, but managed to escape only because of his personal connection to Henrietta. Ultimately, Jeffrey would be sent home to England, but he would never arrive there because his vessel was captured by pirates, whose base was on the North African coastline. The oddity was unfortunately destined for a life in slavery, which he had just attempted to escape from. And this is where the mystery comes in. Following the Civil War and having been set free, a man claiming to be Jeffrey arrived in England in the late 1660s. The man knew several details and even resembled the dwarf who had been captured many years earlier. The only reported change was that he had now doubled in height. At the time he was captured, Jeffrey was almost 30 years old and still unusually small, but upon his return, he'd grown to an almost normal stature. The man himself attributed his sudden growth spurt to the ill treatment he was subjected to, but the real cause of it, or even if this was Jeffrey, remains a mystery. Number 7. Roger Charles Titchborne was born into an old English Catholic family in 1829. The family was wealthy and owned extensive estates around Hampshire. Since he was the oldest son, Titchborne would be subjected to a typical aristocratic upbringing. After gaining an army commission into the 6th Dragoons, he fell in love with a relative named Catherine, which ultimately cost him the opportunity to continue with the Dragoons. Due to the disapproval of both families, the heir, heartbroken, fled England in 1854 and headed off on a long tour of South America, hoping to recover. According to reports, after reaching Rio, he would board a ship named the Bella, which was heading for Jamaica that year. During the voyage, though, the Bella mysteriously vanished and was never seen again. When one empty longboat turned up, hope to find survivors dwindled, and the Titchborne family was left dealing with the grief of their estranged yet beloved son. With the non-linear stages of grief, there came denial, which Lady Titchborne would be the unfortunate bearer of. Refusing to believe that her son had passed away, she began the desperate search for him. After receiving much encouragement from an alleged clairvoyant who claimed that the oldest son was still alive, she began placing missing person posters all over South America and Australia. Descriptions of the missing Titchborne even appeared in newspapers, accompanied by a substantial reward. The descriptions referred to him as having a delicate constitution. He was tall, light brown hair, and had blue eyes. Upon his departure, Titchborne was of a slender build, with a sallow face, straight hair, and weighing under 150 pounds. He also had a tattoo on his left arm. For the next 11 years, she waited, hope still brewing. During that time, her husband had passed away, and the estate would be passed down to the younger son, Alfred. Then, just when all seemed lost, a letter arrived from Australia, and an enduring mystery soon unfolded. The letter, though poorly written, was from someone claiming to be the missing Titchborne, and the lady was immediately convinced that this was from her missing son. The author of the note claimed to be the missing son, stating that he was in Wagga Wagga, Australia, working as a butcher. He was also living under an alias, Thomas Castro. He was married by this time and had also had a baby. Overjoyed by the possibility that her long-lost son was alive, the lady invited the family over to England, where they hoped to claim the inheritance. Upon his arrival, several local Titchborne workers began noticing some inconsistencies between the Roger Titchborne they once knew and the one who had returned. The claimant, for instance, was up to 200 pounds, had a large, rounded face and wavy hair. Aside from these changes, the man bore a striking resemblance to the missing individual. The family of the lady also believed that he was a fraud, but the woman believed otherwise. Grief-stricken and wanting nothing more than closure, she maintained that he was telling the truth. This was further supported when, quite bizarrely, the claimant revealed details of the shipwreck. He stated that after the Bella sank, he was rescued by a ship called the Osprey, bound for Melbourne, and there he took up a life as a butcher. Although faced with some skepticism, there were others who believed that Castro was indeed the missing Titchborne, including 2 former servants who recognized him instantly. As the years went by and the questions abounded, the claimant continued to put on more weight. By 1871, he had reached the 400-pound mark, prompting some to wonder whether he was enjoying his meals again, or if he was intentionally trying to obscure his appearance. But this mysterious man continued to recall things consistent with Titchborne's childhood, such as the fly fishing tackle he used, the clothing he wore, and the name of the family dog. A doctor had even taken a look at the man and drew on resemblances between the claimant and the missing son. That being said, there were also some elements working against him. The correspondence sent to his mother was full of errors, even though Titchborne was well educated. He also lacked the French accent and even the understanding of it. He didn't recognize his father's handwriting, nor did he recall which boarding college he attended. The inconsistencies he maintained were caused by the shipwreck, which scrambled his memory and affected him in inexplicable ways. A trial would later be held against the claimant, for which there was an abundance of evidence to find him guilty of perjury. It was the longest trial in an English court, lasting nearly 200 days. By the end of it, and in just half an hour, the jury found the mystery man guilty, and he served a 10-year prison sentence. Still, he maintained that he was Roger Titchborne, even when he was paid to confess otherwise. Number 6. Marring Brazil's colonial history, which dates from 1500 to 1815 CE, is the slave trade. Much of the work completed during this period had been carried out by slaves who were brought over from India and Africa. Due to the fact that no one wants to be forced into hard labor without pay or compensation, many rebelled against it. Rebellions often saw the freeing of enslaved people and the fighting for their rights, but that meant that they would need a place to go, and during that era, that place was sure to emerge. From the dust, the settlement of Palmares arose, located in the interior of Alagoas. Named for its abundance of palm trees, Palmares became a settlement for escaped slaves. They were welcomed here with open arms to live a life of freedom. Ruling over this growing kingdom was King Zombi, along with his wife, a mysterious historical figure known as Dandara. The last queen of the free nation wasn't just a ruler. She was a warrior, and an enigmatic one at that. While we don't know much about this figure, there are a few details that have survived the times that make her all the more intriguing. According to surviving records, mostly those passed down through oral tradition, Dandara was an Afro-Brazilian who freed herself from enslavement, though her exact origins are unknown. At some point in her life, this heroic warrior became an absolute expert in a form of martial arts that makes use of dance, acrobatics, spirituality, and musical elements. It would be this very technique that she used in combat, allowing her and her fellow fighters to often gain the upper hand. Dandara was also a great hunter and farmer. This essentially sums up all we know about this colonial-era heroine, who stood alongside her husband, Zombi, who's also regarded as a hero by those they saved. Yet there's much more information relating to the king in this story. It turns out that the reason this female warrior is so mysterious is that, unlike other heroes of her time, she was not documented in the reports of the period. The written accounts that survived were all written by the enemy, who hoped to minimize the actions of the free settlement and the influence of women, ultimately omitting Dandara's history, origins, and life from the records. As a result of this, the warrior was elevated to the realm of a legend, where questions about her existence came into question. In the tales of Dandara's movement, she was described as a great leader, one who led and fought with strategy alongside her husband. Not making it into the records was the fact that she was directly responsible for several of Palmares' victories. According to the stories, this mysterious figure's life would come to an abrupt end when Palmares was invaded and she was captured. Afterward, she opted to be slain rather than return to a life of subjugation, thus concluding the story of Dandara dos Palmares. Number 5. The world's leading figures who control society as a whole object to anything that goes outside their borders. This is why so much of genuine history has been censored, or specifically prevented from being mainstreamed. With the oppression of such things, many historical figures have become lost, and that's why you've probably never heard of the mysterious individual known as Public Universal Friend, also known as Jemima Wilkinson, the Friend, or simply PUF. Born in November of 1752 in Cumberland, Rhode Island, the Friend was the 8th child of Amy and Jeremiah. As a child, this figure had fine black hair and eyes and was said to be incredibly strong and athletic. In childhood, the individual would become a departmental equestrian, a practice continued into adulthood. Adding to the characteristics describing them was their love for reading, which ultimately established the ability to quote lengthy passages of the Bible, as well as the accepted Quaker texts of the era. By the mid-1770s, the figure began attending meetings in Cumberland with the New Light Baptists, a religious group that encouraged a rather radical approach to worshiping their God. The New Light Baptists proved to be part of a much larger movement that has now been referred to as the First Great Awakening. Drawn to the intensity of this movement, Jemima found herself attending more and more meetings as religious enthusiasm was spiking. Just a few short years later, though, things were about to take a bizarre change for the individual, who in 1776 had fallen gravely ill. According to historical records, this individual contracted an epidemic disease, though no confirmation as to what that disease was has been made. The symptoms, though, saw the figure bedridden, with a fever so high that many believed he wouldn't survive, and this is where the mystery comes in. After several days in bed, the fever finally broke and the figure emerged good and well, only for a strange proclamation to be made. The patient was no longer alive. Instead, the individual claimed to have been visited by the Spirit of God through 2 archangels who brought them back to life as a whole new person. That person identified with no gender, and so the Public Universal Friend was born. The Friend claimed that the only reason they lived was to serve their savior from then on out. The Friend refused to respond to the name Jemima Wilkinson, and would either chastise or ignore anyone who used it. Immediately after their rebirth, the Public Universal Friend began preaching to the public, recounting their spiritual awakening. Although the community didn't believe the story, the individual was undeterred and instead began to travel the world, slowly building a community of followers who became known as the Universal Friends. By the 1780s, several newspapers and pamphlets covered the Friends' sermons, but rather than focusing on theology, they focused on the gender aspect, to which the figure would often respond, "I am that I am," suggesting no connections to male or female. The Friend would pass away in 1819 after giving their last sermon. No funerary service was held upon their wishes, and instead their body was simply placed in a coffin with a window on its top. It was placed in a thick stone vault located in the basement of the Friend's home, only to be removed several years later and buried in an unmarked grave. Number 4. So mysterious was this 1800s figure that in the modern day, he's been given his own Wikipedia page, documentary, and even a Pearl Jam song. His arrival in western Connecticut and eastern New York was marked in 1857 and characterized by a clump of walking leather. The unidentified vagabond named the Leatherman was swallowed by 60 pounds worth of homemade leather clothing, which he wore in all kinds of weather, no matter the temperature. The figure appeared in the towns, accepting food and drink from passers-by, but never loitering long enough to gain the attention of the law. He also didn't stick around long enough to identify himself or explain his reason for being. The sightings of him were constant, but varied from place to place. Some saw him once a week, while an alternative account claimed he passed through Middletown once every 5 weeks. By 1880, most accounts of him claimed that he would enigmatically appear once every 34 days. No one knew where he came from, where he went or where he slept. By this time, most onlookers had noted his route and calculated that he was walking on a constant clockwise loop that began in Westchester County. 365 miles took him through Connecticut and New York, the repetition of which clocked more than 100,000 miles from 1857 to 1889. It was very seldom that the Leatherman ever made a sound. If he did, it was only a grunt or a few mumbled words spoken in French. At one point, a curious journalist decided to follow him, hoping to figure out where he went. Supposedly, he followed him to a cave of sorts, a shelving of rocks located within the woods. And here, the journalist alleged that there was a well of water and a maintained garden. His article concluded with the statement, "We could but wish this poor creature success in his loneliness." Today, we still wonder who he was, where he came from, and why he dressed in leather, and what the purpose of this long walk was. The last aspect is one of the more perplexing features in the Leatherman's legend. His never-ending journey was so punctual and precise, and nobody could figure out why. The Leatherman remains one of the most elusive figures in history, with many questions still unanswered. Number 3. The 18th century was a time marred by mystery. Bizarre events and unusual characters were the norm. The latter is often true when it comes to Europe, with stories so strange and sinister that they're almost unbelievable. It was 1702 when a youthful man appeared in Holland, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, with some incredible stories to tell. He was said to have come from a faraway place, a place where his people devoured children. The figure was the man from Formosa. After arriving in the area, the mysterious individual, who seemingly showed up with no name, claimed to have been the victim of a kidnapping. Unnervingly, he alleged that he was abducted by a Jesuit named Father de Rode of Avignon. The evil missionary, according to the unknown man, brought him to Europe, where he attempted to force him to convert to Catholicism. Refusing to give up his paganistic ways, the mystery man was tossed in prison, but made a risky escape. His freedom, though, was not long-lasting, and the soldiers of the Elector Count of Cologne captured him and returned him to the Catholics. But again, the man from Formosa escaped, after which he found himself in the hands of the Dutch, who allegedly attempted to convert him to Calvinism. While he was in the Netherlands, he claimed to have met an Anglican priest whose teachings amazed the man so much that he decided to head to Holland. This was the wild story that the mysterious individual told, and because no one knew what Formosans looked like, they didn't argue with the facts. Formosa, though, is modern-day Taiwan, where blonde hair and blue eyes are certainly not the norm. The strange man also spoke fluent Latin, but had a Dutch accent. Babbling in his own unknown language, he worshipped the sun and moon. He also slept upright in a chair and ate only spiced raw meat. While in Holland, the nameless man would meet William Innes, who persuaded him to convert to Anglicanism, after which he would be baptized and given a new name. That name was George Sulmanser. With this newfound identity, he was taken to England, where he was introduced to the Bishop of London in 1703. There, George was welcomed with open arms into the British high society. The elites treated him as some sort of exotic curiosity, and even the Royal Society took a keen interest in him. Through his alleged exotic customs, George became so popular that merchants and nobles began inviting him to dinner parties where they found amusement in his gibberish language and mouthfuls of raw meat. The man told strange stories of his people, which all turned out to be completely inaccurate later on. George's lies about his origins raised considerable suspicion about him, and he was subsequently identified as an imposter. Ultimately, the exposure of his inconsistencies left behind unanswered questions. Who was the man from Formosa? Number 2. The 16th century is a time marked by a social phenomenon in which revolts and uprisings were prevalent throughout Europe. The movements had been sparked by social imbalances, particularly a deep economic recession. Through a series of wars and increasing fiscal pressure, uprisings were inevitable. Those revolts took the form of events such as the German Peasants' War of the Revolt of Ghent. Serving as another example of the era of the disturbances was La Germania, the Revolt of the Brotherhoods. The second half of the 14th century saw the Mallorca kingdom spiraling into debt, with a large portion of the financial pressure falling on the people of the rural areas, mostly that of peasants or the working class. By the 16th century, the economic crisis had not gotten any better, but instead worsened, leading to alleged plots being conspired against the crown. Having received a tip in February of 1521, the viceroy, Miquel de Gurria, ordered the arrest of a group of people believed to be plotting against him, but this order would ultimately trigger a riot. The very next day, a mob of craftsmen armed with several weapons would seize the castle of Almudena and forced the viceroy to free the captives. This marked the very beginning of the revolt of the Brotherhoods. Leading the riot was a mystery man referred to as El Rey Encubert, Catalan for the Hidden King. The mysterious man, often referred to simply as the Hidden, gathered the rebels together and they stormed the tyrannical royal palace. For the next few years, the Brotherhood, overseen by the Hidden King, would fight against the armies. The unidentified man claimed to be a prince who was hidden for his own safety. He'd only chosen to reveal himself to save Spain from complete ruin. Under the Hidden, the revolt saw the recruitment of local elites, leaders, and farmers. Of course, the royalists refused to comply with the demands, only exacerbating the violence. By now, word of the guerrilla leader, who seemingly had no name, had reached the ears of the elite, who now sought to put a stop to the mysterious warriors' revolt. By placing a bounty on the Hidden's head, two of his own supporters, eager for money, galloped toward him, without stopping, and severed his head from his body. They retrieved his remains and claimed the prize, only for other supporters to jump up, claiming to be the Hidden, and that he wasn't truly gone. None, though, proved good enough to take over and lead as El Rey Encubert. The decollation marked an end of an enigmatic leader whose existence is shrouded in questions, and no one has ever figured out who he was. Number 1. It was July 4th, 1930, when the most mysterious individual in history appeared in Detroit, Michigan. It's clear that the past is teeming with strange, elusive characters whose identities are marked by puzzling characteristics, but none of them can quite beat the story of Wallace Fard Muhammad, who, according to the FBI, used 58 aliases during his lifetime. Upon his arrival, the strange man began to preach in the streets of Black Bottom, and ultimately found a religion that he called the Nation of Islam. With an ambiguous background and several names, Wallace would preach exceptionalism and pride. He claimed he was the original man and that Caucasians were devils, that an alleged mad scientist created through eugenics. After building his religious group, they would preach abstinence from narcotics, alcoholism, and pork. Wallace's focus was predominantly on the African American community, despite not being African American himself. The strange man was described as handsome, with thick black hair and brows. He had a penchant for incredibly ornate robes, as well as wearing a fez or Turkish cap. Though initially appearing as a harmless religious group, an apparent human sacrifice led to Wallace's arrest. He was later released in order to leave Detroit and never return. Instead of obeying these instructions, though, the strange man continued to return, often using different names or acquiring new ones from the people he met. After receiving several threats for returning to the city, Wallace eventually vanished, leaving a mystery in his wake. He seemingly blended in with the rest of society, never to be seen again. The FBI would soon begin to investigate the mysterious figure and began to believe that he was of Hawaiian descent, a claim that could never be confirmed. The Bureau also suggested a lengthy criminal history of assault and dealings in narcotics, though again no concrete proof materialized. The question remains, who was Wallace D. Fard, the ethnic chameleon? Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.